Welcome, everyone. I'm Dawn Littlefield-Gordon. I work at Maine CDC and am a member of Maine Public Health Association. On behalf of MPHA, I want to welcome you to Creating Corridors for the Active Transportation. And just to note that this is being recorded. If you are on and you have the ability to mute, that would be great if you're not speaking. And I want to just let you know that this event was planned by MPH with the support from the Obesity Member Section, Bicycle Coalition of Maine, and Maine Trails Alliance. If you are so inclined, we'd love you to introduce yourselves in the chat. In addition, if you have any questions during the presentation, we're asking people to put those in the chat and we'll address those at the end. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Becca Bolis, Executive Director, Maine Public Health Association. Jean Sideris, Executive Director of Bicycle Coalition of Maine. Sue Ellen Bordwell, President of Casco Bay Trail Alliance, and Dick Woodbury, Board Member in Casco Bay Trail Alliance and East Coast Greenway Alliance. Welcome, and I'm going to turn that over to Becca.
Thanks, Dawn. And good afternoon, everybody. I am excited to be here to talk with you about active transportation and public health. This is something that I teach a whole course about, so it'll be really hard to distill just this little bit to talk with you about the public health benefits of being active, especially for transportation. So next slide, please. So there are a few data points that I just want to start off with, and that's that we have a physical inactivity problem in Maine and in the US. In Maine, data show that 23% of Maine adults are physically inactive, and across the US, that number is 26%, with levels varying between 14 to 48%. And the reason that they vary is because we have seen data that suggest that physical activity is impacted by where we live, who we spend our time with, our income, our education status, and our race and our ethnicity, and mostly being driven by where we live and who we spend our time with. And I just want to also acknowledge that physical inactivity is its own risk factor for poor health, including increased risk for cancer, for type 2 diabetes, mental health consequences, including anxiety and depression, as well as other chronic health conditions, including cardiovascular disease and obesity. And I point that out because I think a lot of times, and understandably so, we focus on promoting physical activity without talking about the consequence of more time spent being sedentary. Next slide, please. So what determines our levels of physical activity? And with that, like I said before, with inactivity, it's a factor of where we live and who we spend our time with, in addition to other factors. But in the context of this conversation, I think paying attention to communities and figuring out the environmental factors that encourage and can discourage physical activity are important. And so what the research literature shows is that determinants of inactivity include urbanization patterns and technological change, and not surprisingly, that determinants of increased activity include mixed land use, connectivity, population density, neighborhood design, perceived safety, and other environmental factors like that. And next slide, please. So the last point I just want to end on is discussing the health benefits of being physically active. More than 400 studies show that there is a positive association between spending time outside, being active, and health. And that includes reducing stress, anxiety, depression, blood pressure, and even likelihood of being aggressive. Other associations show improved cognitive function, improved sleep quality, social connectedness, and life satisfaction. And while these improvements are important for individual and community health, I think it's also worth noting that they also can help build land stewards and improve conservation advocacy networks. As people spend more time in nature and feeling connected to the outdoors, that can help them increase their likelihood of wanting to engage work to protect those same places. And these psychosocial and engagement benefits can help us as we prepare and respond to climate change, promote equity in trail use, and improve community and psychological resilience. And the last point I'll end on before turning it over to Jean is a note of encouragement, which is just that spending 120 minutes or about 2 hours each week can result in those improvements. And that time does not have to be one long trip. It can be shorter bouts during the day. So in order to glean those health benefits, it can be shorter time in each bout that we spend. So with that, Jean, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Becca. And thanks to the Maine Public Health Association for hosting this conversation and for everyone for joining us today. Next slide. So Becca touched on some of these things, but I wanted to cover sort of the why we should invest in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure and facilities. The first one being public health. Easy access to trails, but even easy access to sidewalks can really infuse movement into our everyday life. So if you have a 15-minute walk or bike ride each way to work, for example, that's sufficient to meet CDC's recommended physical activity guidelines. Proximity to trails is associated with people being 50% more likely to meet physical activity guidelines and 80% more likely to use a bicycle. There's also been some interesting studies around kids who are able to walk to school and have been found to have higher academic performance in terms of attention or alertness, lower levels of stress, and higher levels of happiness. So there's a lot of public health benefits to these sort of investments. The next one I want to talk about vibrant downtowns. So as we think about walkability or bikeability in urban networks and village centers, it can really help facilitate the spread of small local shops or street markets, increase variety of goods and services, support independent retailing, local employment, startup opportunities, sort of a whole range of ways to really create these vibrant downtown towns or village centers. And relatedly, on economic growth, for Maine, tourism is, as we all know, such a core part of our economy. And walkability creates public spaces that are really just simply a pleasure to be in. Folks like to, when they're traveling different places, you really want to get a sense of place. You want to connect with the community and the people and the culture. In addition to all the amazing natural beauty Maine has to offer, investing in walkable and bikeable downtowns can also really be part of spurring economic growth and attracting tourists and keep them coming back. Another thing on the economic side that I think about a lot. So a car costs on average about $9,000 a year. So creating walkable neighborhoods that allow a family to eliminate or cut its driving can have substantial savings for household expenses, freeing up disposable income or just simply lessening the burden on the cost of living. And for those living with disabilities or from low-income households, the ability to walk or use public transit to get to work can really mean the difference between having economic independence, preservation, or livelihood. So these are all key things. And the last thing I would just mention is reducing global warming pollution. Here in Maine, transportation accounts for over half of our global warming emissions. And of that half, about 60% are from passenger vehicles. So reducing vehicle miles traveled, getting people out of their cars, investing in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, and particularly when we invest those along with public transportation, can really be an important piece of Maine's climate action plan. Next slide. I want to just take a moment to talk about two trails that already exist here in Maine and some of the benefits that they have brought to their communities. So the Downey Sunrise Trail is an 87-mile gravel trail from Ellsworth to Ayers Junction. It's a mixed use trail, so it's open for biking, walking, skiing, and also ATVs and snowmobiles. And a study that was done over a 10-month period in 2013 to 2014 showed about 6,000 visitors. Survey respondents estimated they spent $50 a day, and the total direct economic impact of $236,000 over that 10-month period study. So this is, you could see that there are, it's an attraction, it's an economic development opportunity The trail was completed in 2010 and continues to really be a unique and exciting resource that brings in visitors and economic growth. The region also completed last year some signage of the Bold Coast Scenic Bikeway, which is an on-road bikeway that is just another way to attract bicycle tourism to the region. Next slide. And on the southern part of our state, the Eastern Trail, 60-mile trail, it's a mix of off-road and on-road. And a 2014 study on that trail showed nearly 90,000 visitors and a direct economic impact of approximately $900,000. This first section of this Eastern Trail was opened in 2004. And it's just another example of how trails really attract visitors and provide economic input. Next slide. So those are just two examples of the power and the value of investing in a bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, and particularly trails. I wanted to talk just a little bit about some of the programs that exist across the state to help fund and build this type of facilities. So there's the Recreational Trails Program. This is a federal program run through the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. It supports the creation of non-motorized, motorized, and diverse use trails. It's about $1 million a year that's available. It requires a local match, but cities, towns, nonprofits, or other entities can apply for that funding to help support the building of those sort of trails. The Bicycle and Pedestrian Program. So this is a federal program that's run through the Maine Department of Transportation. About $2 million or so is spent annually here in Maine, and it funds nearly all of the bike and pedestrian project in Maine. This is everything from a crosswalk, sidewalks, bike lanes, walkways on bridges, sort of a whole range of facilities fall under this program. And with the recently passed federal infrastructure bill, we'll see nearly a double of the available funding for these type of programs, along with safe routes to school and some other really great programs and funding through that federal bill that we're hoping will be coming into Maine in the near future. And the last thing I just want to let folks know about, so the state is about to embark on its first ever active transportation plan. This will kick off in early 2022. And the idea is to have a statewide plan to look at how it can increase active transportation opportunities. The process should take about a year. There'll be lots of opportunities for public input. And we're really hoping that it'll be the first time to really lay out a vision for corridors and investments in biking and walking. And with that, I think I'll pass it over to Sue.
All right. So my name is Sue Ellen Bordwell, and welcome everybody. I have for the last 25 years been active in trying to get a part of the East Coast Greenway into Maine. I saw on a national level how many states were doing a great job of putting sections together. And as Jean just pointed out, we have two big sections of that in Down East Maine and in Southern Maine. I live in Yarmouth, and it has always been a mystery how we were going to get through Yarmouth. At the same time, I spent years commuting to Portland to work and saw an unused rail line paralleling Route 1 and Route 295 and wondered why we couldn't make that a trail. So a lot of what you're going to hear next from Dick is how we looked at the possibility of taking an unused rail corridor, making it into a trail, but not just a trail for Yarmouth or Portland, but hooking that idea into a regional vision. That way there is a bigger group of people who would be interested in supporting the idea and the vision, and hopefully a better way to move whatever we need to move through the legislature, which we'll talk about later, the process for doing this. At that point, I think my only word before we go to Dick, and then Dick and I will answer questions, one of the things about making a trail happen is it's a long time to make them happen. I think right now we are able to function as efficiently as we have because we have learned from other people's experiences, and we've sort of almost jumped the queue in terms of how we're moving our vision forward. But it's a long game, and it's so easy to get distracted from how long it takes to make things happen and how many hoops need to be gone through. We are in a remarkable period of history right now where the attention on climate and health has risen higher than I think it's ever been in the public sentiment, and people understand, as they never did before, how important these trails are, not just for recreation, but for transportation, for climate, for health. So I'm going to turn it over to Dick Woodbury, who is on the National Board of the East Coast Greenway and on the board of the Casco Bay organization, which is a very new, young toddler when it comes to trail organizations. But Dick will show you the way, and then we can answer questions as they come up. Dick.
Thanks, Sue Ellen. Hi, everybody. Great to be with you. Becca emphasized this relationship between physical inactivity or physical activity and health. And so I just have to start with the personal anecdote that earlier in my life, I lived very close to a bike trail. And I happened to work at an office that was about 6 miles down that bike trail. And that became a part of my everyday life, was commuting from my home to my office on that bike trail. And I can't tell you how transformative that was to have physical activity built into my day. So I wasn't coming home from work and, with my young kids and my, figuring out what we're going to do for dinner and all those things where you just trying to find a way to fit it in. Having that greenway was truly transformative for me. So I come to this with some experience as to sort of what these things do in transforming lives, because you just don't do those things when you have to be in the middle of traffic on a regular road. The infrastructure creates the opportunity that enables you to do it. So I got involved, quite a while ago, as Sue Ellen described. I'm going to start just sort of stepping back 30,000 feet a little bit and looking at the East Coast Greenway, because the East Coast Greenway is a vision for a 3,000 mile fully connected bike path greenway that goes all along the East Coast from the top of Maine to the bottom of Florida. And very deliberately in the development of this vision and mission was the idea that this bikeway route should go right through where people live. So it's very much designed to be situated in the population centers of where people live so that it becomes part of their daily lives. And that, it has characteristics. It's often compared with the Appalachian Trail, but the Appalachian Trail is something you go to for a wilderness experience. It is not something that is sitting in your backyard ready for you to use every day. And that's an important aspect of, I think, what we begin to talk about when we think about active transportation and an active transportation network. And as Jean emphasized a lot, creating the infrastructure that creates opportunities for people to walk and bike and so forth is a very healthy alternative. And part of that in the local area is good sidewalks and walking facilities. But greenways are, in a way, the highways, the arteries that connect to that local infrastructure. And so that's what's led us to think a lot more about how do we create not just the complete streets, the sidewalks, and those aspects of local infrastructure, but also the connector segments, the greenways that actually connect communities one to another. Because active transportation is about not just going outside for recreation, but actually getting you from one place to another place that you want to be, whether it be to the grocery store or to work or to school or to a coffee shop or to meet friends or the library or whatever it might be. So there's the sort of larger on this screen, you see the larger East Coast Greenway vision. And about 3 years ago, I joined the board of the East Coast Greenway Alliance. And at about the same time, there was a new New England coordinator who was hired for the Greenway. And we looked at this map and said, okay, well, we got to figure out where we're going to put this thing in Maine. Oh, by the way, I just say this 3,000 mile vision, about 1,000 miles of it is done. So there's actual Greenway on about 1,000 miles. And the other 2,000 is lots of local communities figuring out projects to connect the little pieces. So we're going to zoom in on Maine and then think about some, what's going on with the Maine network and what's going on with legislative developments and so forth. So let's just jump to the next slide. And this is looking at the map we just looked at a minute ago, but zoomed in on Maine and trying to say, how can we actually complete the Maine segments? Jean in her presentation noted two of the biggest pieces that are already done in Maine. So the Down East Sunrise Trail that is between Ellsworth and Calais, up in the northeastern part of the state, is 83 miles of completed bikeable route. Probably its condition could be improved, but it's an 83-mile segment that's already completed. That's the biggest already done in Maine. She also mentioned the Eastern Trail, which goes from Portland south to Kennebunk so far, and that's about 25 miles of off-road Greenway trail. And then there's some smaller segments, some through Portland, like the Eastern Prom Trail, some the Kennebec River Rail Trail, the Brunswick along the Androscoggin River. A number of other segments are done, but then there's big gaps. And if you look at the brown corridors on this map, they're corridors that are really prime for next stage development in trying to connect this whole thing together. And I guess I'll go through each one. So starting in the south, the Eastern Trail is on a natural gas pipeline corridor. Used to be a train corridor, that natural gas pipeline corridor continues from where the trail currently ends in Kennebunk and goes all the way down to South Berwick. So a natural, easy to extend aspect of this is that segment is to just continue down that same natural gas corridor that the company is perfectly happy to have as a trail. So that project, in terms of getting it done, is largely just finding the funding to actually construct the trail. Moving up, you'll notice there's a significant segment that goes from Portland up to Yarmouth and then up to the Lewiston-Auburn area. Right now, there is an unused state-owned rail corridor called the St. Lawrence and Atlantic Rail Corridor that covers that route. So there's a vision that's developing for taking that rail corridor and turning it into a rail trail. So that's another piece of what, if we were allowed to turn that into a rail trail, it's a natural place to put it. The same story exists for the piece that goes between Topsom and Brunswick area up to Gardner to connect to the Kennebec River Rail Trail. That's called the Merry Meeting Trail Project. That's also on an unused, state-owned rail corridor. Then if you jump back up to Washington County and we look up sort of to the end of where the Ellsworth to Calais Down East Sunrise Trail goes, there's an extender segment, which is right now, the Down East Sunrise Trail ends at Ayers Junction, and the map that Jean showed where Ayers Junction was. There's about 15 miles more to go to get from there up to Calais. So that's, and again, we're talking about an unused state-owned rail corridor. So as we focused in on what can we do in Maine to create the East Coast Greenway in Maine, unused rail corridors became an important piece of the potential puzzle of how to do it. If we jump to the next slide, this slide is some work we did with the Maine Trails Coalition to say, well, what kind of long distance trails can we look at all over the state? And so you see some of the green lines. Don't look at the circled ones yet, but all around other parts of the state, they're unused rail corridors that have been turned into trails. And there's some great trail systems around the state. The 4 projects, or actually 3 of the 4 that I just mentioned, are the ones that are circled: the Downey Sunrise Trail, the Merry Meeting Trail, the one that goes from Portland through Yarmouth up to Lewiston, which would be the Casco Bay Trail and the Royal River Greenbelt. And then there's another unused state-owned rail corridor that goes, it's used right now from Portland to Westbrook a little bit, but from Westbrook all the way out to Freiburg is not used and hasn't been used for 40 years. So that's another resource. So the fact that we have all of these rail corridor infrastructure pieces already in place that aren't currently being used by trains, we have approached the Maine Department of Transportation to ask, well, what would we need to do to get permission? Because the Maine Department of Transportation are the ones in charge of these corridors. What would we need to do to get permission to turn these corridors, either until trains come back or permanently into a trail use? And because there are, some that envision trains coming back sooner rather than later, the Department of Transportation has wanted to put in place a process for evaluating these corridors. Actually, before I get to that process, and we could jump to the next slide, I just want to sort of show how those projects have kind of come together into a larger vision for the whole southern Maine region. So if you sort of start from Portland, you can see there's a trail going south, it's the Eastern Trail. There's a the potential trail going west, that would be the Mountain Division Trail. There's a trail system going north that would go to Brunswick, Topsom, and to Lewiston, Auburn. That's a group of the Casco Bay Trail is working on. And then there's this, the Merry Meeting Trailblazers are working on trails that would go there from Topsom, Brunswick, all the way up to Augusta or east to Bath and potentially on there. So the potential for this fully connected network system is beginning to really take shape. And just jumping back to how this relates to active transportation more broadly, these are what you can think of as the greenway arteries that then connect to the complete streets and sidewalk systems and so forth that exist in every community. But you still need a greenway. If you want to have active transportation between communities, you need a greenway that connects them. And this is the vision of what's starting to take shape among these trail organizations that think this is a really important thing to do. So how do we get from here to there? How do we actually turn the 9 existing trails that are listed on this chart here into the 23 and the fully connected system that we'd really like to see happen? So here's what's kind of happened over the last year or so. Turning to the next slide. We went to the legislature and, again, I said, we went to the Department of Transportation and asked the department, what do we need to do to be able to turn these things into trails? And they said, well, we want every different constituency that would like to use these corridors for something. They could be passenger trains. They could be freight trains. They could be designated bus routes. They could be trails. We need a process that looks at these corridors and allows everybody to come to the table with their ideas and get some evaluation and advice on what to do. So they created something called a Rail Corridor Use Advisory Council process, which is now in existence and will begin to meet. These councils will begin to meet to look at each of these corridors and decide, listen to all the constituencies and decide what is advised to do with each one. That process is in place. At the same time, and Jean mentioned this, the department for the first time is establishing an active transportation plan for the state. Our hope is that this Greenway vision in some way makes it into this statewide active transportation plan. Third, they're conducting some passenger rail studies of making a train connection, a passenger train connection between Portland and Lewiston, Auburn, and making a passenger train connection between Portland and Bangor. All three of these sets of things are really complementary and in a very broad way, taking a look at the whole rail corridor infrastructure in the state, and particularly the pieces of it that aren't being used by trains right now, and saying, what should we do with it going forward? Should it be passenger trains? Should it be trails? Should it be something else? So that's all beginning to happen, and that's a pretty exciting place to be right now. I go to the next slide, and it is about, yeah, okay. So our group that is interested in these rail trails, one of the key groups opposing it, or constituencies opposing it, are those who'd like to use these same corridors for trains. And so where some of our work has proceeded over the last few months really is beginning to look at those corridors and beginning to realize that you can prioritize some existing rail corridors that make sense for train use and some that make sense for trail use. So this particular map is one that's saying, well, okay, let's look at, you know, what's everybody talking about in terms of expanding passenger trains as a public transportation option. And they're talking about moving the Portland station so that it doesn't have to back up when it continues on to Freeport and Brunswick. There's discussion of a new station at Turnpike Exit 53. In the Amtrak plan, there's potential extension of the Amtrak line from Brunswick going out to Rockland. There's discussion of a track going up to Lewiston, Auburn, and a track going up to Bangor. There's discussion more remotely about, could we even go to Montreal? So this picture here is on existing train lines that could fully accomplish what's being discussed in terms of expanded passenger train service in Maine. I bring this up because these are all different corridors than the unused state-owned corridors that we're suggesting exist as trails. So if you jump to the next slide, we overlay the two. And you just see that they're different networks. And you know, just as sort of an example, looking between Portland and Lewiston, Auburn, the St. Lawrence and Atlantic line is the line that's in green. That could be a rail trail. It doesn't in any way preclude expanded train service that would be on the blue line. So this is again something that we hope we can incorporate into the planning that's happening in the Department of Transportation, so that whatever vision they develop for a statewide train system can proceed ahead, and at the same time, whatever they envision for an active transportation, you know, trail-related vision can also proceed ahead without being in conflict, but really in a complementary way. So the next slide, getting involved in this issue, I feel like this is an area of public policy, and you know, I served in the legislature for a while and worked on lots of areas of public policy. I don't think I've worked on an area of public policy that spanned so many different public, you know, like categories, major categories of public benefit, public health, emission-free transportation. So, you know, climate change is dealing with that. Economic development and tourism. There's a ton of tourists, Representative Bell, by the way, who seek out these these trails for their, so it's an economic development issue. Community enrichment, quality of life, we mentioned lifestyle change and so forth. This issue spans so many significant categories of public policy. Next slide. What really made me excited about getting invited to do this webinar was, really for the first time, we, so far we've developed over the past couple of years as a really effective coalition, I think, of trail advocates. And you see the names of some of them on this, join our mailing list. This is a group that's now, we meet a lot. The groups listed on this and others as part of the Maine Trails Coalition meets together a lot and are really trying to advance trails in a way that I don't think we've ever done in a coordinated way in the past. So we'd obviously love to have more people join our mailing list so you know what's going on and can take action when there are opportunities to take action. We hope you'll share the vision. And as these rail corridor use advisory councils start to happen and give opportunities for public comment, we'll be notifying the people who are on our mailing lists about opportunities to testify, and we hope many people will testify. So I'll stop there and happy to answer questions with the others in the group.
Thank you so much to our presenters, Becca, Jean, Sue, and Dick. We really appreciate you having here, and Dawn for doing our welcome and introduction. And thank you to everybody for attending. I'm Heather Drake, the membership manager with Maine Public Health Association, and we'd love to open it up and take some questions. And we've had some come in with the first wondering how the federal infrastructure bill will impact the completion of the Greenway, if at all. And as more questions come in, feel free to raise your hand or enter them into the chat.
I can try to take the infrastructure bill question. So the infrastructure, what is it, IIJA, something Jobs Act, it was the one that just recently passed. There's sort of two federal policies that are moving, the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better. So these are separate bills. One is moved, one is still under consideration. The infrastructure bill does include, as I mentioned, a fair amount of increased funding for bicycle and pedestrian and active transportation. It includes public transportation money, broadband, sort of a whole range of things. Exactly how that money will be allocated and sort of what the formula is, that they call it, is still in the works. So some of it might be tied to climate goals. You demonstrate that this will have an effect on reducing emissions, and that will how the money will be sort of allocated. There were also some, if folks remember, they're often called earmarks. So these are specific projects that members of Congress put forward and get money for. There was part of the Greenway that was in one of those. Those have not yet been decided upon or funded. So those are still possibilities too. So there is an infusion of federal money to support active transportation, to support bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. How exactly it's going to be allocated and pulled out, we're not totally sure. And the Build Back Better bill might also have additional money, particularly tied to issues of equity and climate. So maybe not a great answer, but to be determined, but it's looking very hopeful.
Thank you, Jean. Does anyone else want to add on to that question before we?
No, I think the whole funding piece is still an open question as to how it will break down when it comes locally. I did see an interesting question in the chat from Andrew Walton about the railroad companies. It's an interesting thing that the lines that we are looking at to create this regional vision are state-owned. The state is prohibited by law of running railroads. So they can own the railroads and then they lease out the right to use those railroad on those lines. So it's an interesting non-rail company issue. What's happening in other states is that, for example, CSX, which is one of the largest freight carriers, and there's a lot of talk about the fact that they're buying up all of the lines in Maine that are currently owned by Pan Am, which is significant. But they are very surgical in looking at what lines are income producing and which lines are lost leaders. And they are across the country getting rid of those lost leaders. We don't know whether once they buy these lines in Maine, whether that will happen. But there is another thing that I think we need to be realistic about, because it's going to require, I think, a lot of work on the part of the state policymakers, state elected officials and whatnot, is that if, and I hope I don't get too far in the weeds here, but if CSX does end up buying all these lines, they're a freight company. And we are proposing that freight and passenger rail share the same lines as the most efficient way to do business. The freight carriers do not like that at all and fight it tooth and nail. So I think we have, even if the vision goes forward, we have a lot of conversations and problem solving to do. I have no doubt it can be done.
Thank you, Sue, and thanks for fielding that question. Another one that's come in, there's a lot of focus on equity and making sure that access is equitable in constructing the rail trails and the active transportation and corridors. Is there the consideration of equity, and how is that managed, especially in terms of, urban areas and accessibility to greenery?
Dick, you want to try that one?
Sure. The notion of active transportation being concentrated where populations are most concentrated, so the most people use it as part of their daily lives, is certainly central to this effort. We're also trying very hard to place this in the context of a multimodal public transportation partnership vision that's interconnected. So, so for example, you could walk from Portland to Falmouth and take a bus back as just kind of an example of, ways that this fits together in that enables use by people with, diverse means and backgrounds. So, I think we're learning how to do it better, but I think it's integral to the whole underlying concept of what we're trying to do as well.
I would just add to that, if I could, the advisory council process, I think also another place to really ensure a wide variety of stakeholders and populations are part of the discussion and part of the process. So being really thoughtful about those opportunities for public input and reaching folks who might be affected by it in different ways will be really critical.
Sue, did you want to add on to that? Yes, that okay. The next question I have. Oh, did you have something?
I'm back. Sorry,
okay.
I somehow certain things seem to break through my phone silencing mechanism. One of the interesting things that came up in a discussion I had recently, we have a board member who's had some health problems, and she is, it's being recommended that she use during certain times a wheelchair. And she walks a lot, or she always has been. And it suddenly made sense to her about how trails, particularly the more urban trails that connect with more regional trails, really help people with disabilities to participate both in active transportation and a recreation mode that is not all that safe and accessible without a trail network. And I just thought that was a pretty interesting observation from somebody who hadn't thought about that level of service that a trail provides. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. And I think too, thinking through the different ways that we can use transportation, Dick, your example, walk one way, take a bus the other way, and how to make that known and educate communities. And that goes a bit to Dawn's question about what needs to be done to promote or provide more education to the general populations that could benefit from the addition to the trails and greenways.
I don't know what others think about this. I mean, I think part of it is raising awareness that these exist, that the ones that exist. I don't think everybody knows that. That I think is number one. And then promoting some of the other benefits, in addition to the health ones I mentioned. I think the ones that Jean mentioned in terms of being able to visit different, stores or restaurants, other kind of museums, other exploratory pieces. It's funny, I've always wanted to do the Down East Sunrise Trail. And so I've spent a lot of time on that website and trying to clear my calendar so I can cycle the whole thing. And it's fun, right? To look on there and to see all these different places to explore and to plan a trip. And I think part of it is on that marketing piece, Dawn. I mean, that's, I think it's marketing and making people, increasing awareness of these opportunities. And as this effort gets underway and even more trails are added, just continuing that promotion. I do see that as part of public health is increasing awareness and marketing of these opportunities.
Thank you.
Another place I'd add on that is through schools and sort of getting kids out on trails in different ways, out into nature, out into places that are probably in their backyard that they might not know about, maybe not literal backyard, but neighborhood backyard. And I think with COVID, we've seen a lot more interest in outdoor education, where that means just kids outside being educated, but also outdoor education and being able to use the resources we have and the facilities we have now to get other folks excited about building more of those and investing in those. And I think once, kids being exposed can also help to reach the parents in a kind of a unique way.
I just have one more thing to build off that real quick. Knowing this audience, I recognize a lot of your names, so you're probably already familiar with this, but there was a promotion this summer called Hidden Hikes of Maine. And it was a list and an inventory of these sort of hidden hikes or different places to explore. And I thought that was a great example of getting people to find new places that maybe they hadn't been before. And there were incentives, you could earn a water bottle or a jacket from LL Bean. And there was a cost to participate. So there is that. But even if you didn't want to get the incentives, you could still download the list of places. And so that was, I think, a fun way to explore. And there could be a similar Hidden Trails of Maine type of approach. Not that hiking doesn't have trails, but just a different angle on that. So just kind of, when you mentioned kids, it made me think of that event this summer.
Yeah, I see Anne's hand up, but I'm going to, I think we need to play up better than we have so far, how this integrates so many multiple aspects of public policy. And I'm sort of seeing in this group, Eliza is somebody who's done a lot of environmental stuff, right? So there's the environmental piece. Of course, there's lots of public health people in this. So you have health, environment, the economic development downtown piece that's sort of related to what Anne does. Transportation, the transportation department, thinks of itself as sort of a roads and bridges and, trains and, that kind of transportation. So the fact that this bridges those, I think, is something we really need to elevate and work together to do. Anne, why don't you go ahead? You got your hand up.
Sure, I have my hand up. Yes, Dick, totally building on what you said, it is really like a cross-sector policy issue and or opportunity, without a doubt. And And, most of you understand this, but I oversee the National Main Street program and serve as a statewide resource for downtown revitalization around the state. And many, many of our communities touch these trail systems and they work together, right? The ability to ride and then get off for a place where you can stop and sit, get something to drink or eat or have another experience is critical to these trail systems as far as both tourism and economic development. And we know that nationally. We have case studies all over the place that I look at and think, God, if only Maine could get these pieces connected. And I guess I'll just remind anyone who doesn't know that I am very willing to continue to support the effort with the local contacts in these communities that may serve as advocates and or storytellers for you as you try to keep building this larger trail system. If you need a contact in, a Biddeford or a Saco or a Westbrook or a Freiburg, like I've been there, I know the leaders, and you just may want to broaden your reach, and I'm happy to continue to help in that effort and or do what I can do on a statewide level. So that's it.
Thank you, Anne. And do you mind dropping your contact information into the chat so folks can have that easily?
Sure, Heather, I would be glad to.
Thank you. And we do have, switching gears a little bit, a question from Eric, and he's wondering if there are any emerging best practices and policies for regulating e-bikes on active transportation corridors. And I know a couple of years ago, this was came up as a topic in Acadia.
Yeah, so the regulations that currently exist are more around e-bikes off trail, like mountain bike trails. So it probably depends on the surface. We are closely following kind of national standards and trying to work with other bicycle coalitions and groups like People for Bikes to make those standard and consistent from state to state. But e-bikes are definitely picking up. One of the things in the infrastructure bill is a tax credit for purchasing an e-bike. So there's some incentivizing in that space too. So it's a good thing to think about, and as all these corridors, you often are sharing the use, and that might be as simple as somebody walking and a bike and thinking about how to accommodate both of them and have both users be thoughtful and respectful of that space. But then you also have ones with like the Downey Sunray Trail where you have walkers, bikers, and ATVs. And that's a whole other kind of challenge of the motorized and non-motorized users. So a lot of it really depends so much on the specific trail, the conditions, the likely users, and as e-bikes will be one of those, especially as they grow in popularity and just sheer numbers.
Go ahead, Sue.
I'm about to put my email into the chat. I put out twice a month a list of resources or a list of articles about trails, rails, economic development, health, whatever is happening, mostly in New England, but across the country and occasionally in other countries. So if you want, it's just a list of links. And if you might be interested in just knowing what's going on, right now there's a lot of news about the infrastructure bill, but I can add you to the list and you can try it out. And if you find it's not very useful to you, just let me know and I'll take you off. So there it goes.
Thank you, Sue. That's great. And I do encourage people to sign up. We have about 5 minutes left, so I just want to check in with our panelists and see if you have any closing thoughts or encouragement for ways that people can get involved in their communities and advocate for more rail trails or other corridors.
Well, I'll just say, it's so great to be able to work with you all in the public health community. I think the voices of public health experts and practitioners is really key. Can be extremely influential. So, I'm sure Dick and Sue Ellen, but also I will commit to sort of passing on opportunities to speak up or get involved, because continuing to make that connection to the value of this and the enormous gain you get from these relatively small investments. If you think about what it takes to put in a new road or extend a highway, like the kind of money and resources you put into that compared to putting into active transportation, the gains are just so big. And so continuing to make that, not just in the monetary way, but also all the public health, I think will be really important to keeping these conversations going and getting us towards these visions.
Same. It's really, really great to be part of this discussion, and obviously the public health community is going to be very important to continuing to advance this stuff. So thank you all.
And I'll just end by saying that personally, I love figuring out how we can encourage active transportation. It's an issue that's important to me. And obviously, we saw with what I kicked off with, the public health benefits. So I think that any opportunity that MPHA can be involved in to support this work across the state and regionally, because we do have regional partners that we want to do that. So thank you all very much for joining the panel, and thanks to everyone who joined us today for this conversation.
Becca, I think I put this in the chat, but if the Public Health Association hasn't, you might want to contact the Commissioner of Transportation and ask for a public health representative on these advisory councils. I think that would be extraordinarily helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Sue Ellen. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat or any that have come to me, and we've got about 2 more minutes left. So just, it sounds, I mean, this has been a great conversation, a lot of good information. And so thank you to all of our panelists and Dawn as well for being here today, and to everyone for participating in your thoughtful questions. And it sounds like we have a lot of action items in terms of joining regional councils, signing up for listservs, and becoming more engaged in this work. So thank you all so much, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.